The stars outside Galactic Station Harmony 7 burned cold and distant as they always did, and Una watched them through the observation. A window while she waited for her coffee to finish brewing in the small machine that hummed beside her. She had been on this station for 11 months now, and in all that time, she had never felt like she truly belonged here. The Kalani officers walked past her without a glance, and the Vorton engineers treated her like she was invisible, and even the other humans on the station seemed too busy with their important work to notice a junior xenobiologist who spent most of her days studying animal behavior patterns from old data files. Una was 28 years old, and she had graduated at the top of her class from the Seoul Xenobiology Institute back on Earth, and she had dreamed of making first contact with alien species and forming bonds across the stars. Instead, she sat in a small office and read reports about creatures she had never seen in person. The coffee machine beeped, and she poured herself a cup and took a sip, and the warmth spread through her chest as she continued to stare at the endless
darkness.
Outside, her communicator buzzed, and she looked down to see a message from her friend. Taeho's message said that something big was happening at Docking Bay 4, and that she should come and see it for herself. Una finished her coffee quickly and left her small office and walked through the winding corridors of the station toward the docking bay. The station was massive, and it served as a hub for dozens of species from across the coalition, and normally the corridors were busy with all kinds of aliens going about their business. But today something was different. Today everyone seemed to be moving in the same direction, and there was an energy in the air that Una had not felt before. She found Taeho standing near the entrance to Docking Bay 4, and he was a tall man with kind eyes and messy black hair, and he had been her only real friend on this station since she arrived. He waved when he saw her, and she walked over to stand beside him. Una asked what was happening, and Taeho pointed toward the massive doors of the docking bay that were slowly sliding open. He told her that a Kalani warship had just arrived, and that they had brought something special with them. Una asked what they had brought, and Taeho smiled in that nervous way he always did when something dangerous was about to happen. He said they had brought a Morax. Una felt her heart skip a beat at the name she had read about Morax creatures in her studies, and she knew they were apex predators from the death world of Karis Prime, and she knew they were considered among the most Tazoas dangerous living things in the known galaxy. She asked why anyone would bring such a creature to this station, and Taeho explained that the Coalition wanted to train it as a living weapon for the border defense program. The doors finished opening, and a crowd had gathered now, and Una could see dozens of Kalani soldiers in their gleaming silver armor. Marching out of the ship in perfect formation behind them came a massive hovering cage made of reinforced plasma barriers, and inside that cage was the most terrifying and beautiful creature Una had ever seen. The Morax was enormous, and it stood at least 3 meters tall at the shoulder, and it had 6 powerful legs that ended in claws that looked like they could tear through steelits. The body was covered in scales that seemed to absorb light, and they were black like the void between stars, and they shifted and moved as the creature breathed. It had 4 eyes that burned like amber fire, and they swept across the crowd with an intelligence that made Una shiver. 2 massive tusks curved up from its lower jaw, and she knew from her studies that those tusks could puncture starship hulls. Creature let out a roar that shook the walls of the docking bay, and several aliens in the crowd stepped back in fear, but Una did not step back. She watched the Morax with wide eyes, and she felt something stir in her chest, and it was not fear, but fascination behind. The cage walked a single Kalani, and he was different from the soldiers around him. He was older, and his blue skin was marked with dozens of ritual scars, and he wore robes instead of armor, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never known Faluradaho. Leaned close to Una and whispered that this was Vorik, and that he was the most famous warbeast handler in 3-star systems. Una had heard the name before, and she knew that Vorik had tamed creatures that entire armies had failed to capture, and she knew that he was considered a living legend. Among the Kalana, Commander Galwin stepped forward to greet Vorik, and the commander was a tall Vorton with gray skin and 4 arms, and he ran this station with cold efficiency. The commander welcomed Vorik to the station and said that they were Honored to have such a distinguished handler working with them, Vorik nodded once, and his black eyes moved across the crowd, as if measuring each person present and finding them all lacking. He said that the honor was his, and that he had been waiting many years to test himself against a Morax commander. Asked how long Vorik expected the training process to take. Vorik smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile, and he said that the creature would be fully broken within 3 weeks, and that it would obey any command given to it by that time. Una felt something twist in her stomach at the word broken. She looked at the Morax in its cage, and she saw how it paced back and forth, and how its muscles tensed every time one of the soldiers came too close. She did not see a monster. She saw a frightened animal that was very far from home. The commander thanked Vorik and said that containment facilities had been prepared in Section 7, and that Vorik could begin his work whenever he was ready. Vorik said he would begin immediately, and he gestured for the soldiers to move the cage forward. Crowd parted to let them through, and Una watched as the Morax was taken away, and its 4 amber eyes swept across the faces of the aliens watching it, and for just a moment those eyes met hers. Something passed between them in that moment, and Una could not explain what it was, but she felt it deep in her bones. The creature looked at her, and she looked back, and there was no fear in her gaze, and perhaps the Morax noticed this because it stopped roaring and simply stared at her until the cage moved out of sight. Who asked if she was okay, and Una realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly and said that she was fine, and that she wanted to see the containment facility. Tahoe looked at her with concern and said that Section 7 was restricted and that they would not be allowed inside. Una said that there was an observation deck, and that anyone could watch from there, and that she wanted to see what Vorik was going to do. Tahoe sighed and said that he did not understand her fascination with dangerous creatures, but that he would come with her because someone needed to make sure she did not do anything foolish. They walked together through the corridors of the station and made their way to Section 7, and when they arrived at the observation deck, they found it already crowded with curious aliens. Una pushed her way to the front and pressed her hands against the transparent barrier and looked down into the containment facility below. The Morax had been released from its transport cage into a larger enclosure, and it stood in the center of the space, and its 4 eyes moved constantly as it assessed its new price. And Vorik stood on a platform above the enclosure, and he held a long staff that crackled with blue energy at one end. He spoke in a loud, clear voice and explained to the observers that the first step in breaking a war beast was to establish dominance, and to show the creature that resistance was futile and painful. Una watched as Vorik pressed a button on his staff, and a drone flew into the enclosure. Carrying a piece of raw meat, the Morax lunged at the drone with incredible speed and snatched the meat from its grip and devoured it in one bite. Vorik pressed another button, and the floor of the enclosure sparked with electricity, and the Morax howled in pain and confusion. Vorik explained that this was the foundation of the Kalani method, and that the creature would learn to associate food with obedience and pain with resistance. He said that within a few days the Morax would understand that Vorik controlled everything, and that submission was the only path to survival. The Morax roared at Vorik and charged at the platform, but a plasma barrier stopped it and threw it back, and the creature crashed to the ground with a sound that made Una wince. Vorik did not flinch, and he did not show any emotion as he watched the creature struggle to its feet. He said that this one had spirit, but that all spirits could be broken with enough time and enough pain. Una watched the session continue for another hour, and with each passing minute, she felt her distress growing. She saw the intelligence in the Morax, and she saw how it tested the barriers, and how it learned from each failed attempt, and how it watched Vorik with those burning amber eyes. This was not a mindless beast. This was a thinking, feeling creature that was being tortured into submission. When she finally left the observation deck, her hands were shaking, and Tahoe asked what was wrong. Una said that this was not right, and that there had to be a better way. Tahoe said that Vorik was the expert, and that this was how it had always been done, and that she should not get involved in things she did not understand. Una did not respond, but she knew in her heart that she could not simply watch this happen. She had spent her whole life studying the bonds between different species, and she had read about how humans had once tamed wolves and turned them into loyal companions. And she had read about how humans had formed partnerships with horses and falcons and even elephants. Humans did not break animals. Humans befriended them. She returned to her small office and pulled up every file she could find about Morax biology and behavior, and she studied late into the night while the rest of the station slept. Hand as she read, she began to form a plan. It was a dangerous plan, and it might not work, and it would probably get her in serious trouble, but she could not stop thinking about those 4 amber eyes and the intelligence she had seen behind them. Could not stop thinking about the word broken and how wrong it had sounded. Somewhere in Section 7, the Morax was alone and afraid and in pain, and Una decided that she was going to help it. 3 days passed on Station Harmony 7, and Una returned to the observation deck every chance she got, watching Vorik work with the Morax while taking careful notes on everything she observed. Each session was worse than the last, and each day the legendary handler grew more frustrated and more brutal in his methods as the creature continued to resist his attempts at dominance of Vorik. Used every technique in his considerable arsenal, techniques that had worked on dozens of species across 3 star systems and had earned him his legendary reputation. He starved the creature for days at a time, withholding food until the Morax was weak and desperate, and then offered meals that were snatched away at the last moment. He shocked it with electricity whenever it showed defiance, sending bolts of pain through its massive body until it collapsed on the floor of the enclosure. He kept it in total darkness for hours and then blinded it with bright lights that hurt its sensitive eyes. Trying to disorient it and break down its resistance, he sent armed drones into the enclosure to harass it constantly, giving the creature no rest and no peace, attacking it from all directions whenever it tried to sleep. He played loud sounds at random intervals, sirens and explosions and screaming, trying to keep it from ever feeling safe or calm. He did everything in his power to break the spirit of the magnificent beast, and he documented each session with the clinical detachment of a scientist conducting an experiment. But the Morax would not break. It fought back with everything it had, refusing to submit no matter how much pain Vorik inflicted upon it. It destroyed 17 drones in the first week alone, tearing them apart with its massive claws and crushing them beneath its powerful legs. It learned to anticipate the electric shocks and brace itself against the pain, gritting its teeth and refusing to cry out even when the voltage increased. When Vorik sent handlers into the enclosure to try direct confrontation, the Morax nearly killed 2 of them in a matter of seconds only. The emergency barrier system saved their lives, activating just in time to separate the creature from its would-be masters. The handlers were carried away on stretchers, their bodies broken and bleeding, and Vorik watched them go with a frown on his scarred face. Una watched all of this from the observation deck. She took notes on everything she saw, filling her datapad with observations and theories. She noticed patterns that Vorik seemed to miss entirely, patterns that told a different story than the one the legendary handler believed he was seeing. She noticed that the Morax only attacked when it felt cornered, when the drones or handlers approached too close and cut off its escape routes when given space. It would retreat rather than fight, choosing distance over confrontation whenever possible. She noticed that its aggression spiked whenever someone made direct eye contact with it, which was likely a dominance behavior from its home world, where eye contact was a challenge. She noticed that late at night, when the handlers had gone and the lights were dimmed and the station was quiet, the creature would lie down in the corner of its enclosure and make a soft keening sound. It was a sound that made Una's heart ache, because it sounded almost like grief, like the creature was mourning something it had lost. Perhaps it was mourning its home, the death world of Karis Prime, where it had lived free and wild before the Kalani came. Perhaps it was mourning its family. It had had one other Morax that it had hunted with and slept beside and protected. Perhaps it was simply mourning its freedom, the open skies and endless plains that it would never see again. This was not a mindless killing machine. Una realized with growing certainty this was an intelligent being that had been ripped from its home and put in a cage and tortured by creatures it could not understand, which was not refusing to submit because it was incapable of learning, was refusing to submit because it was smart enough to hate its captor. Steho found her on the observation deck one evening when most of the other watchers had gone home. and he sat down beside her on the cold metal bench and asked why she kept coming back. Yuna told him that she was learning, that she was studying the creature's behavior and trying to understand. What was really happening in that enclosure? Taeho asked what she meant. And Yuna took a deep breath and explained her theory. She said that the Kalani method was designed for creatures that operated on pure instinct. Animals that responded to stimuli without conscious thought. It worked by overwhelming the survival drive until the animal accepted submission as the only way to live, trading its freedom from pain. But the Morax was different. The Morax was intelligent enough to feel more than just fear, to experience emotions that went beyond simple survival instincts. It felt anger at the beings who hurt it, resentment at its captivity, and hatred for Vorik, who caused it so much suffering every time Vorik hurt it. The creature did not learn to obey, learned to hate its captors. Moretaho considered this for a long moment. His brow furrowed in thought, and then he said that. It sounded like she might be right, but he also said that it did not matter, because Vorik was the expert, and nobody was going to listen to a junior xenobiologist with no experience handling dangerous animals. The coalition had hired the best, and the best was Vorik, and that was the end of the discussion, as far as the commanders were concerned. Aduna said that she was not trying to convince anyone, that she just wanted to understand what was happening. But even as she said this, she knew it was not entirely true. She wanted to do more than understand. She wanted to help the creature in that cage, to save it from the endless torture that was accomplishing nothing except making it more dangerous. The days continued to pass, and Vorik grew more frustrated with each failed session, his calm demeanor cracking as the Morax continued to defy him. His methods grew harsher and more desperate, pushing the boundaries of what even the Kalani considered acceptable treatment. He began using heavier shocks that left burns on the creature's scales, and longer periods of starvation that left it weak and trembling. The Morax grew thinner, and its obsidian scales lost some of their luster. But it did not grow more obedient. If anything, its hatred seemed to intensify with each passing day, its amber eyes burning with a fire that would not be extinguished. Then the 12th day something terrible happened, something that changed everything. Vorik sent 3 handler drones into the enclosure at once. Trying a new tactic he had devised in his growing desperation, he wanted to corner the Morax and force it into a submission pose, a position of vulnerability. That would demonstrate its acceptance of his authority. The creature was supposed to be weakened from days of starvation, too tired to fight back effectively, but Vorik had underestimated the power of hatred and defiance. The Morax exploded into motion the moment the drones entered its space. Moving faster than Yuna had ever seen it move before, it was like watching lightning strike 3 times in rapid succession. Each movement precise and devastating. The creature destroyed all 3 drones in seconds, tearing them apart with its claws and crushing them beneath its feet. But one of the drones had been carrying a shock prod, a backup weapon in case the creature got too close to the handler's A's. The Morax crushed the drone. The prod discharged directly into the creature's face, sending a massive bolt of electricity through its skull. The Morax screamed in agony, a sound that Yuna would never forget as long as she lived. It thrashed wildly in pain and confusion. In its thrashing, it slammed against the barrier controls. And something went wrong with the systems. Some malfunction that should have been impossible. The barrier flickered and failed for just a moment. Less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. The Morax surged forward with all the speed and power of an apex predator, and its claws caught Vorik across the chest before the backup systems kicked in and raised the barrier. Again, the legendary handler fell from his platform with blood pouring from deep wounds that cut through his robes and into his flesh. Emergency alarms filled the station with their screaming, and medical teams rushed to the scene to save his life. Yuna watched in horror as they carried Vorik away on a stretcher, his blue skin pale from blood loss and his eyes closed in unconsciousness. She saw the Morax standing in its enclosure with blood on its claws and burns on its face from the electrical discharge. She saw something in its eyes that looked almost like satisfaction, almost like Justice Commander Galwin arrived at the observation deck within minutes, his forearms crossed over his chest and his face dark with anger and concern. He announced in a voice that carried throughout the entire section, that the Morax would be terminated immediately. Said that the creature had proven beyond any doubt that it could not be controlled. That it was too dangerous to keep alive. Several officers around him agreed loudly, saying that the beast was too dangerous to keep alive, that it should be destroyed before it hurt. Anyone else? They spoke of the wounded handlers and of Vorik's injuries, and of the threat the creature posed to everyone on the station. Nuna heard herself speaking before she could stop herself, her voice cutting through the chorus of agreement. She said that termination was not necessary, that there was another way to handle the creature. The commander turned to look at her, his 4 eyes narrowing as he tried to remember who she was and why she was speaking. He asked what she had said, and Yuna felt her heart pounding in her chest so hard she thought it might burst. But she did not back down, because she knew that if she stayed silent, the creature would die. She said that she had been studying the Morax for the past, 12 days? Observing its behavior and analyzing its responses, she said that she believed the Kalani method would never work on a creature of this intelligence, because it was too smart to be broken through simple pain conditioning. Said that humans had a different way of working with animals, a method based on trust and positive reinforcement rather than pain and dominance. She said that she wanted permission to try. The commander stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief to something that might have been amusement. Then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh, but rather the laugh of someone who has heard something so absurd that it does not deserve a serious response. He said that she was a junior scientist with no experience handling dangerous creatures of any kind. He said that she was suggesting she could succeed where the greatest handler in 3 star systems had failed. He said that the idea was laughable, and several of the officers around him laughed. With Yuna felt her face flush with embarrassment, but she did not look away from the commander's cold eyes. She said that she was not claiming to be better than Vorik, that she would never make such an arrogant claim. She was simply suggesting that a different approach might yield different results. She said that what Vorik was doing was clearly not working, and that trying something new could not make the situation any worse. The commander shook his head slowly, as if dealing with a child who did not understand simple facts. He said that the creature had proven it was untamable, that it had nearly killed the best handler in the galaxy. Said that the decision was final and not open for debate. The Morax would be terminated in the morning. And that was the end of the matter. Yuna tried to argue, tried to find words that would change his mind. But the commander walked away before she could speak again. The other officers followed him, and soon she was alone on the observation deck with only Teho beside her. Her friend put a hand on her shoulder and said that she had tried, that she had done everything she could. He said that there was nothing more she could do, that the decision was out of her hands. Yuna looked down at the Morax in its enclosure, and the creature was pacing again. Despite its obvious exhaustion, its wounds from the fight were still bleeding, dark fluid dripping from the burns on its face and the gashes on its legs. Looked tired and broken and defeated, but it was not broken. Not really. She could see that it was still fighting even now, still refusing to surrender, still defying its captors with every breath it took. She told Teho that she could not let them kill it, that she had to try something, even if it meant risking everything. Teho asked what she meant, and his voice was heavy with worry, because he knew that tone it was the tone she used when she was about to do something dangerous, and Fulashuna said that she needed his help, that she needed him to get her access to the containment facility during the night cycle when everyone else was asleep. Teho stared at her like she had completely lost her mind. He said that was impossible, that it was against at least a dozen regulations, and probably several laws said that she could be expelled from the station, or imprisoned, or worse. Suna said that she knew the risks and was willing to accept them. Teho said that the creature had just nearly killed the best handler in the galaxy, that it was covered in blood and wounds and would be more aggressive than ever. He said that if she went in there, she would die, and that he would not help her commit suicide. Iona said that she did not think the creature would hurt her. She explained what she had observed over the past 12 days, all the patterns and behaviors that she had noticed. She told him about how the Morax only attacked when it felt threatened, and about how it retreated when given space. She told him about the grief sounds it made at night when it thought no one was listening. She said that Vorik had been trying to dominate the creature. But that domination was not the only way humans had tamed wolves, not by beating them into submission, but by offering them food and companionship and a place in the pack. Humans had formed bonds with dozens of species throughout their history, and they had done it through patience and trust, not through pain and fear. Tejo listened to everything she said, and when she finished, he was quiet for a very long time. Finally, he asked if she really believed this could work. If she truly thought she could walk into that enclosure and come out, Alivana said that she did not know for certain, but that she had to try. She said that if she was wrong, then she would be the only one who got hurt, and that the creature would be terminated anyway, but if she was right, then they might be able to save an innocent life that did not deserve to die. Tejo rubbed his face with his hands and let out a long breath that seemed to carry all the weight of his concerns. He said that she was going to get herself killed, and that he was an idiot for even considering helping her. Then he said that he would do. Ituna felt tears prick at her eyes, and she hugged her friend tightly. Thanking him for believing in her, he hugged her back and said that she should save her thanks until after they both survived this foolish plan. They spent the rest of the evening preparing for what was to. Comuna gathered everything she would need, synthesizing protein strips that matched the Morax's natural diet from the records she had studied. She found a simple metal rod that would serve as a stick. Remembering the game she had played with dogs back on Earth when she was a child, she reviewed everything she knew about the creature one more time, memorizing every detail of its behavior and responses. Late that night, when most of the station was asleep and the corridors were empty, Tejo used his engineering access codes to get them into Section 7. He led her through back corridors and maintenance tunnels that most people did not know existed, places where they would not be spotted by security cameras or patrol officers. When they reached the containment facility, he used his codes again to disable the security alerts, buying them a window of time before anyone would notice what they were doing. He told her that he would stay at the monitoring station and keep watch. He said that he would keep the emergency barriers ready, and that if anything went wrong, he would pull her out immediately. He made her promise to follow his instructions if he told her to run. Yuna thanked him again, her voice trembling slightly despite her determination. Then she walked toward the doors that led to the Morax enclosure. Her hands were shaking and her heart was pounding, and she had never been so afraid in her entire life. But she thought about those 4 amber eyes and the intelligence she had seen behind them. She thought about the keening sound the creature made when it was alone, the sound of grief and loss and loneliness. She thought about how it had been ripped from its home and tortured for weeks by beings he could not understand, and she opened the door and stepped inside, ready to face whatever awaited her on the other side. The outer chamber was cold and dark, lit only by the dim emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red and shadow. Yuna stood just inside the door and let her eyes just to the darkness, breathing slowly and trying to calm her racing heart through the transparent barrier. Could see the main enclosure stretching out before her, a vast space that seemed much larger now that she was standing at its edge, rather than watching from above, somewhere in the shadows. The Morax was waiting, and she could hear it breathing. The sound was deep and rhythmic, like distant thunder rolling across the plains of some alien world. Tejo's voice came through the small communicator in her ear. Soft and worried, he asked if she was okay, if she wanted to turn back, if she had changed her mind about this insane planuna. Whispered that she was fine and that she was going to begin. She walked slowly toward the barrier, keeping her movements calm and deliberate and making sure not to do anything sudden that might startle the creature. The Morax must have heard her footsteps on the metal floor, because the breathing changed and became faster and more alert too. Amber eyes appeared in the darkness, glowing like embers from a dying fire. Then 2 more eyes appeared beside them, and all 4 were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle and the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The creature emerged from the shadows, where it had been resting, and it was even more impressive up close than it had been from the observation deck. Its massive body was covered in those light-absorbing scales that seemed to drink in what little illumination existed. making it look like a piece of the void itself had taken shape and come to life. 6 legs moved with a predatory grace that spoke of millions of years of evolution on a world where only the strongest and fastest survived the wounds from its fight with the drones were still visible on its body. Dark blood dried on its chest and face where the electricity had burned it looked at her and let out a low growl that she felt in her bones. A warning that needed no translation. Una stopped walking and stood perfectly still. She did not make eye contact with the creature, remembering what she had learned about dominance behaviors in pack predators. Instead, she looked at the ground in front of her. Keeping her gaze lowered and submissive, she kept her body language small and non-threatening, hunching her shoulders slightly and letting her arms hang loose at her side. Sand, she waited. The Morax growled again, louder this time, and took a step toward the barrier. Its claws scraped against the floor with a sound like metal dragging across stone, and each step made the ground tremble slightly beneath her. Fitaho spoke in her ear again, and his voice was tight with fear. He told her that the creature was approaching and that she needed to get out of there right now, he said. That he was going to activate the emergency protocols and pull her. Altuna whispered back that he should not do that. That he needed to trust her. She did not move, did not run, did not show any sign of the fear that was making her heart pound so hard she could hear it in her ears. She simply waited. The Morax reached the barrier and slammed against it with enough force to shake the walls of the entire chamber. The impact sent vibrations through the floor that nearly knocked her off her feet, and the creature roared at her with all the fury and pain of the past 2 weeks. Una flinched. She could not help it, but she did not run. She stayed where she was and kept her eyes down and let the creature express its rage. Without responding to it, the Morax roared again and slammed against the barrier a second time, and then a third time. Each impact was like a small earthquake, sending tremors through the floor and rattling the equipment on the walls. The creature was testing her. She realized it wanted to see if she would run like all the others had run, if she would flee in terror like the prey it was designed to hunt. Every other being that had entered this space had come with weapons and pain, and they had all shown fear when confronted with its power. Una was different. She carried no weapons, and though she was terrified, she did not let that fear drive her away. She sat down on the cold floor and crossed her legs and made herself as small and unthreatening as possible. The Morax stopped roaring and stared at her through the barrier. She could almost feel its confusion, could almost hear the thoughts running through its massive head. This was not how the other beings had behaved. The others had carried shock prods and stun guns, and they had heard it and shouted at it and tried to force it into submission. This small, soft creature was doing none of those things. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the sound of the Morax's heavy breathing and Una's own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The creature began to pace along the barrier, its 4 eyes never leaving her, but the growling had faded to a low rumble. Teho asked what was happening, his voice barely above a whisper. Una whispered back that it was working, that the creature was calming down. She said that she needed to stay calm and patient and let the Morax figure out that she was not a threat. More time passed, and Una lost track of how long she had been sitting there in the cold darkness. Her legs grew numb, and her back began to ache from the uncomfortable position. But she did not move. The Morax eventually stopped pacing and sat down on the other side of the barrier, its massive body settling onto the floor with a heavy thump. It was still watching her, still alert for any sign of danger. But its posture had changed. No longer looked ready to attack. It looked tired. Una slowly reached into her bag and pulled out one of the protein strips she had prepared. The movement was careful and deliberate, giving the creature time to see what she was doing. The Morax tensed immediately when she moved, and its growl returned. But Una froze with the food in her hand and did not proceed. She did not throw the strip or try to force the creature to take it. She simply held it out where it could see and smell it. And she waited. The smell must have reached the Morax, because its nostrils flared, and it leaned forward slightly, its amber eyes fixed on the food in her hand. It had not been fed properly in days, and it must be starving, its body desperate for sustenance after all the energy it had expended fighting the drones. But it also learned to associate food with pain and trickery every time Vorik had offered it food. The meal had been followed by electric shocks or some other form of punishment hit. It learned that food from these strange beings was never a gift. Always a Trapuna understood this, and she did not push. He placed the protein strip on the floor in front of her, setting it down gently where the creature could see it clearly. Then she moved her hand away and returned to her passive posture. Her eyes downcast and her body stilled, the Morax watched the food and watched her. And it did not move to take the offering. An hour passed. And then Anatherdaho told her that morning was coming, that the station would soon wake up, and someone would discover what they were doing. He said that she needed to leave before anyone found her. Hiroyuna said she needed more time. Taho said there was no more time, that Vorik would be out of medical soon, and demanding to know what was happening with his creature. He said that the termination order was still active, and would be carried out as soon as the commander gave the Warduna felt desperation rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She could not rush this, could not force a connection that needed to develop naturally. If she tried to push too hard, the Morax would see her as just another enemy, and everything would be ruined. She spoke out loud for the first time since entering the chamber, and her voice was soft and gentle. Barely louder than a whisper, she told the creature that she was not going to hurt it. She said that she knew it had been through terrible things since coming to this station, and that it had every right to be angry and afraid. She said that she was not like the others, that she did not want to break it or control it or use it as a weapon. She said that she just wanted to help, that she wanted to be its friend. The Morax tilted its massive head and looked at her, and something changed in its amber eyes. It could not understand her words, of course, could not comprehend the meaning of the sounds she was making, but perhaps it understood her tone, the gentleness and compassion that colored every syllable. Perhaps it heard something in her voice that it had never heard from any other being on this station. Perhaps it heard kindness. The creature rose slowly to its feet and walked toward the barrier with deliberate steps. Una held her breath as it approached, her body tensing despite her best efforts to stay relaxed. It stopped directly across from her, its massive head hovering just on the other side of the transparent barrier. They were so close now that she could see every detail of its face, every scale and scar, and the subtle movements of its four amber eyes. It lowered its enormous head until its eyes were level with her face, studying her with an intensity that made her feel like it was looking directly into her soul. They looked at each other for a long moment. Human and alien predator, separated by nothing but a thin barrier of energy. Then the Morax made a sound that Una had never heard before. It was not a growl or a roar or anything aggressive. It was a soft rumbling sound that came from deep in its chest, a vibration that she felt more than heard. It reminded her of the purring of a cat, that contented sound that felines made when they felt safe and comfortable. Creature reached out with one massive paw and pressed it against the barrier directly in front of her. The gesture was almost gentle, almost tentative, like it was reaching out to touch something fragile, and Perchuzazuna slowly raised her own hand and pressed it against the barrier in the same spot. Her small human palm aligned with the creature's enormous paw. The barrier hummed between them, warm with energy, but she could feel something else. She could feel the warmth of the creature on the other side, the heat of its body radiating through the plasma field. The Morax rumbled again, and its amber eyes seemed to soften. Una smiled despite the tears that were streaming down her cheeks, and she whispered that everything was going to be okay. She said that she would find a way to help it, that she would not let them hurt it anymore. The creature could not understand her words, but it seemed to understand something. Perhaps it understood that this small being meant it no harm. Perhaps it understood that for the first time since its capture, it had found someone who did not want to break. Idaho's voice came through the communicator, and he sounded like he was crying too. He said that he could not believe what he was seeing, that the bio-readings from the creature showed a dramatic decrease in stress hormones. He said that this was actually working, that she was actually getting through to Atuna. Said that she knew. She said that the Morax had never been a monster, had just been scared and alone and in pain. She stayed there for another hour with her hand pressed against the barrier, and the Morax stayed with hers. Somewhere in that time, something changed between them. Something profound and difficult to describe, a bond began to form, thin and fragile like a thread of spider silk, but real and undeniable when Yuna finally had to leave. She promised the creature that she would come back, she said, that she would find a way to make things better, that she would not abandon it. The Morax watched her go, and it did not roar or slam against the barrier, it simply sat and waited, its amber eyes following her until she disappeared through the door. Yuna made her way back through the maintenance tunnels with Taeho, her mind racing with everything that had happened. They emerged into the main corridors just as the station lights re-brightened for the day cycle. Blending into the crowds of aliens beginning their morning routines, she was exhausted and emotionally drained. But she felt more alive than she had in months. She had made contact with the Morax, had reached out across the vast gulf between species and touched something real. Taeho walked beside her and kept shaking his head in disbelief. Said that what she had done was supposed to be impossible, that no one would believe it if he told them. Yuna said that she did not care if anyone believed it. She said that she needed to go back, that she needed more time with the creature to build on what they had started. Taeho asked what she was going to do about the termination order, and Yuna stopped walking as her heart sank. Had almost forgotten about that in the emotion of the moment. The commander had ordered the Morax killed, and that order would be carried out today unless something changed. She needed to buy more time, needed to convince someone in authority that the creature could be saved. She told Taeho that she had a plan, and that she needed his help one more time. He sighed deeply and said that of course she did, and that he was apparently incapable of saying no to her, no matter how crazy her plans were. Yuna hugged him tightly and said that she would make it up to him somehow. Then she hurried toward Commander Gowan's office, ready to fight for the life of the creature she had only just begun to understand. She did not know if she would succeed, did not know if she could convince the commander to give her a chance, but she had to try because the bond she had felt forming in that dark chamber was real, and she would not abandon the Morax now, not. When they had finally found each other, Commander Galwan's office was located in the upper levels of the station. In a section reserved for senior officers and important dignitaries, Yuna had to pass through 3 security checkpoints to reach it, each one manned by guards who looked at her with suspicion. A junior scientist rarely had business in this part of the station, and the guards clearly wondered what she was doing here. She told them that she had important information about the Morax situation, and they let her through after checking her credentials and scanning her for weapons. The commander's office was large and imposing, with curved walls that showed a panoramic view of the stars outside the station. Expensive art from a dozen different worlds decorated the walls, and the furniture was made of rare materials that Yuna could not even identify. The commander himself was sitting behind a massive curved desk when she entered, and his gray skin looked tired in the harsh lighting. His forearms were busy with multiple data pads, reviewing reports and signing orders and managing the countless details of running a station this size. He looked up when she walked in, and his expression shifted from surprise to annoyance. When he recognized her, he asked what she wanted, and his voice made it clear that he did not appreciate the interruption. Yuna took a deep breath and said that she had come to ask him to delay the termination order for the Morax commander, set down his data pads and leaned back in his chair. Crossing his forearms over his chest, he looked at her like she was something unpleasant that had been tracked into his clean office. He said that they had discussed this yesterday, and that the decision was final, and that a junior scientist had no business questioning the judgment of her superior. Suna said that she understood his position and respected his authority, but that new information had come to light that might change his assessment. The commander's eyes narrowed, and she could tell he was curious. Despite his irritation, he asked what possible new information she could have that would change anything about the situation. Yuna took another breath and began to explain. She said that she had observed the Morax extensively over the past 2 weeks, watching every training session and analyzing every behavior the creature displayed. She said that she had developed a theory about why the Kalani's method was not working, and that she believed her theory explained everything that had happened. The commander gestured for her to continue, his expression unreadable. Yuna explained that the Morax was not operating on pure instinct like the animals that Orc typically worked with. It was intelligent, truly intelligent, capable of complex emotions and conscious decision-making, the creature was refusing to submit, not because it was incapable of being trained, but because it was too smart to accept torture as a path to cooperation every time Vorik heard it. The Morax learned to hate its captors. Morak was not being broken. It was being radicalized. The commander listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked her what alternative she proposed, what she thought could possibly work when the greatest handler in the galaxy had. Faladuna said that humans had a different essence. Method of working with animals. A method that had been developed over thousands of years on Earth. Was based on trust and positive reinforcement rather than pain and dominance. It worked by building a relationship with the animal. By showing it that cooperation led to rewards and good treatments. She said that if she was given time, she believed she could form a bond with the Morax and train it to cooperate willingly. The commander laughed, and the sound was cold and dismissive. He said that he had read about human methods in his research on the species, and that he found them absurd and impractical. He said that humans were a young species that had barely made it to the stars, and that their experience with animals was limited to soft, domesticated creatures that had been bred for thousands of years to be obedient. Morax was not a dog or a horse or any other tame creature. It was an apex predator from a death world. Designed by evolution to be the most efficient killer on a planet full of killer, Suna said that wolves had been apex predators too. Before humans befriended them, she said that, on Earth, the ancestors of dogs had been terrifying pack hunters that could bring down prey. Much larger than themselves, humans had not conquered wolves through strength or violence. They had offered them food, and warmth and companionship. And in return, the wolves had become humanity's most loyal allies. She said that the principle was the same regardless of the species involved. Creature capable of feeling could learn to trust. If trust was offered sincerely, the commander stared at her for a very long time. His 4 eyes unblinking, she could see thoughts moving behind those eyes. Calculations being made and risks being weighed. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was different now. Less dismissive and more considering, he said that he would give her 1 chance. He said that she had 3 days to show measurable progress with the creature if she failed, or if the Morax showed any sign of aggression towards station personnel. The termination order would be carried out immediately. He made it clear that this was not a negotiation, that he would not extend the deadline for any reason. 3 days. And then he expected results. Yuna thanked him profusely and promised that she would not waste this opportunity. The commander waved a hand dismissively and told her to get out of his office. Before he changed, his Minduna hurried out and ran through the corridors until she found Tejo in his engineering bay. Surrounded by tools and equipment and the familiar smell of machine oil, she told him the good news, and he looked relieved, but also deeply worried. He said that 3 days was not very long, and that she had a tremendous amount of work to. Doyuna agreed and said that she needed to get back to the containment facility as soon as possible. They made their way to Section 7 together, and this time they did not have to sneak through maintenance tunnels or avoid security cameras. The commander had authorized her access, and the guards let her through without question. The observation deck was empty when they arrived, and Yuna looked down at the enclosure to see the Morax lying in the corner. It looked exhausted. Its massive body sprawled on the floor, and its 4 eyes half closed. But when she appeared at the observation window, those eyes snapped open immediately. The creature looked up at her, and its amber gaze fixed on her face with unmistakable recognition. Una felt her heart swell with hope. It remembered Hershey. Entered the outer chamber and walked toward the barrier, and the Morax rose to its feet and walked to meet her. It did not roar or growl this time. It simply stood and watched her approach. Its head tilted slightly to one side. When she sat down on the floor, the creature sat down too. Mimicking her posture in a way that seemed almost deliberate, Anna pulled out the protein strips from her bag. And this time, when she placed a strip on the floor, the Morax did not hesitate as long as it sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring as it took in the scent of real food. Then it reached one massive paw under the small gap at the bottom of the barrier and pulled the strip toward itself. The creature ate the strip quickly, and then looked at her expectantly. Its amber eyes, bright with something that might have been Hopiona, gave it another strip, and then another each time she spoke to it in a soft, calm voice, praising it and telling it what a good job it was doing. The Morax could not understand her words, but it was learning to associate her presence with food and comfort instead of pain and fear over the next several hours. Una worked on building trust with the creature. She moved slowly and carefully, always giving it time to see what she was doing before she did it. She never made sudden movements or loud noises that might startle it. She kept her body language relaxed and non-threatening, and she made sure to look away frequently so the creature did not feel challenged. By the end of the first day, she had made significant progress, though. Morax would come to the barrier whenever she entered the chamber, and it would accept food directly from her hand through the small gap at the bottom. It had stopped growling at her entirely, and instead it made that soft rumbling sound that seemed to indicate content. Menaho watched everything from the monitoring station, and his face was a mixture of amazement and disbelief. He said that he had never seen anything like this in his entire life, and that she was doing something that should be impossibly, as said that it was not impossible. It was just different from what everyone else had tried. The second day began, and Una decided that it was time to take a risk. She asked Tejo to lower the barrier, stared at her through the monitoring window like she had completely lost her mind. He said that she was insane, that what she was suggesting was suicide. He reminded her that this creature had nearly killed Vorik, the greatest handler in 3-star systems. He reminded her that it had killed dozens of handlers and soldiers on its homeworld before it was captured. He said that it could end her life in seconds if it decided to attack, and that there would be nothing he could do to save her. Una said that she understood the risks, but that she needed to be in the same space as the creature to build a true bond. She said that she could not form a real connection through a plasma barrier, that the creature needed to know she trusted it. Complete Idaho said that the Morax had no reason to spare her, that it had been tortured and abused, and had every right to kill any being that came within. Richuna said that was exactly why she needed to do this. She said that the creature had learned that all beings wanted to hurt it. She needed to show it that this was not true, that there were beings in the galaxy who wanted to help. Idaho argued with her for nearly an hour, going through every possible objection and every reason why this was a terrible idea, but in the end he agreed to lower the barrier, said that he would keep his hand on the emergency controls the entire time, and that if the creature made any aggressive move, he would raise the barrier immediately. He made her promise to follow his instructions without question if he told her. Tarunona promised, and then she stood at the edge of the enclosure as the plasma barrier flickered and disappeared. The Morax watched this happen, and its massive body tensed with surprise. It understood barriers, had spent weeks slamming against them and being shocked by them. Now the barrier was gone. It could have charged at her in that moment, could have crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat and ended her life with a single swipe of its massive claws. There was nothing to stop it, nothing to protect her, but it did not charge. It stayed where it was, watching her with those 4 amber eyes. Its head tilted in curiositana, took a step into the enclosure, and then another. She spoke softly as she moved, telling the creature that everything was okay, that she was not going to hurt it, and that it did not need to be afraid. The Morax rumbled deep in its chest, and it took a step toward her. Una stopped and waited, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The creature took another step and then another, until it was standing right in front of her. Its massive head was level with her chest, and she could feel the heat radiating from its body. She could smell the wild alien scent of its scales, something musky and ancient that reminded her of deep forests and primal places. It looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them moved for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly and carefully, Una raised her hand and held it out, palm up. The Morax sniffed her hand, its hot breath washing over her skin and making her shiver. It studied her fingers and her palm, learning her scent and deciding what she was in. Then it pressed its enormous head against her palm and closed its 4 eyes and made a sound that was almost like a sigh. Una felt tears streaming down her face as she gently stroked the Creature's scales, they were smooth and warm beneath her fingers. And the Morax leaned into her touch like a dog asking for affection. Ho's voice came through the communicator. And he sounded like he was crying too. He said that the bio readings were incredible, that the creature's stress levels had dropped to almost nothing. He said that this was actually working, that she had actually done. Ituna wrapped her arms around the massive neck of the Morax and hugged it. Tit was enormous, far too large for her arms to reach all the way around. But she held it as best she could, and the creature rumbled contentedly and nuzzled against her shoulder. Accepting the embrace, Yuna decided in that moment that the creature needed a name. I could not keep thinking of it as the Morax or the creature or the beast. It was an individual, with its own personality and feelings and experiences. It deserved a name that was its alone. She decided to call it Baram, which was a word from her native language that meant winded. Seemed fitting for a creature that could move so fast and strike so suddenly. As swift and powerful as a gale, she whispered the name into the creature's ear, and Baram rumbled contentedly and nuzzled against her once more. The bond between them was growing stronger. With every moment now, she just had to prove it too. Everyone else, the morning of the third day arrived with the cold artificial light of the station's simulated dawn. And Yuna knew that this was her last chance to prove that her methods were working. Word had spread through the station about what she was doing, traveling from section to section through whispered conversations and shared video clips. The observation deck was crowded with more aliens than Yuna had ever seen in one place, all of them pressing against the transparent barrier to get a glimpse of the human scientist and her possible project. Commander Galwin was there at the front of the crowd, his forearms clasped behind his back and his gray face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Several high-ranking officers from the coalition military stood beside him, their uniforms crisp and their expressions skeptical. They were watching through a quantum link from their distant headquarters, their faces appearing on holographic displays above the crowd and standing in the corner, separate from everyone else, with bandages still wrapped around his chest. Wozvorik's legendary handler had been released from medical the day before, and he had immediately demanded to see what was happening with what he still called his creature. His black eyes were fixed on the enclosure below, and his scarred face showed a mixture of anger and disbelief. Funa tried not to look at him as she prepared for the demonstration that would decide everything. She could feel his gaze boring into her back, could sense his contempt radiating across the observation deck. She entered the containment facility, and the barrier was already down. Just as she had requested, Baram was waiting for her in the center of the enclosure, and the massive creature rose to its feet. When she appeared, it walked toward her with that fluid, predatory grace, its 6 legs moving in perfect coordination. The crowd on the observation deck murmured nervously, and Yuna could hear several aliens gasping in fear, but Baram ignored them completely. Its 4 amber eyes were focused only on her, only on the small human who had shown it kindness when everyone else had shown it pain. She greeted the creature warmly, reaching up to stroke the ridge above its eyes just the way it liked. Baram rumbled with pleasure and leaned into her touch, its massive body relaxing in her presence. The crowd murmured again, but this time there was wonder mixed with the nervousness. They were seeing something that should not be possible. A deadly predator, acting like a tame Petuna, had brought the metal rod with her. The simple stick that she had been using in their training sessions, she showed it to Baram, holding it up so the creature could see and smell it. Baram sniffed the rod curiously and then looked at her, its head tilted in that questioning way it had. It was asking what she wanted, what game they were going to play this time. Yuna threw the rod across the enclosure, sending it clattering against the far wall with a metallic ring. Baram watched it fly through the air and then turned back to look at her, its amber eyes confused, did not move toward. The Raduna pointed at the stick and spoke in a calm, encouraging voice. She told Baram to go and get the rod and bring it back to her. The creature tilted its massive head and looked at her, and then looked at the rod lying on the ground across the enclosure. It still did not move. Yuna threw a protein strip toward the rod, letting it land near the metal stick. This was the basic technique she had been using throughout their training, associating the desired behavior with a food reward. This time, Baram walked over to the rod and sniffed at it. its nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of the protein strip. It ate the food and then looked back at her. Waiting for more, Yuna praised the creature enthusiastically and threw another strip closer to herself. They repeated this process several times, and each time Yuna moved the protein strip a little closer to her own position, she was teaching Bahram to bring the rod back to her. Step by step, building the behavior through positive reinforcement, the crowd watched in silence, hardly daring to breathe as the training progressed on. The sixth throw, something changed. Bahram picked up the rod in its massive jaws. Carefully gripping the metal without crushing it, it looked at the rod, and then it looked at Yuna. And something seemed to click in its intelligent mind. The creature walked back toward her with the rod in its mouth, and it dropped the stick at her feet with a soft clatter. Bahram looked up at her expectantly, its talon swishing back and forth in what Yuna had learned was a sign of happiness. She gave it a protein strip and praised it enthusiastically. Telling it what a good job it had done, she threw the rod again, and this time Bahram immediately bounded after it. The creature moved like lightning, crossing the enclosure in seconds, and snatched up the rod before it had even stopped bouncing. It ran back to her and dropped the stick at her feet. Looking up with those glowing amber eyes and waiting for its reward, Yuna threw the rod again and again, and each time Bahram retrieved it instantly. By the 10th throw, the creature was doing it without any food reward at all. It was playing the game because it enjoyed it. Because the interaction with Yuna made it happy. The observation deck had gone completely silent. Yuna looked up at the crowd and saw dozens of alien faces staring down at her with expressions of pure disbelief. She saw colony officers with their mouths hanging open, and Vorton engineers shaking their heads in amazement, and coalition military leaders staring at their displays like they were watching a magic trick. Commander Galwan was standing at the front of the observation deck, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. His gray face showed more emotion than Yuna had ever seen from him, a mixture of shock and wonder that transformed his usually cold feature as Vorik had pushed his way to the barrier. And he was gripping the railing so hard that his knuckles had turned white. His scarred face was twisted with an expression she could not quite read, something between fury and disbelief. Funa threw the rod one more time, sending it soaring across the enclosure in a high arc. Bahram bounded after it with almost playful energy, its massive body moving with a joy she had never seen from it before. The creature that Vorik had called Untamable was playing fetch like an oversized dog when Bahram returned with the rod. Yuna hugged the creature tightly and whispered that it had done wonderfully, though. Morax rumbled contentedly and nuzzled against her, its amber eyes soft with affection. The silence on the observation deck broke as everyone started talking at once. Yuna could hear fragments of conversation floating down from above, and most of it was some variation of impossible and unbelievable. And how is this happening? Commander Galwan raised one of his hands for silence, and the crowd slowly quieted. He said that he had seen enough, and that the demonstration was impressive beyond anything he had expected, but he also said that he needed to understand how this had happened, what the human scientists had done differently that had produced such remarkable results. He asked Yuna to explain her methods to the assembled. Zervasuna looked up at the commander and took a deep breath. Gathering her thoughts, she began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the enclosure. She explained that humans had a long history of forming bonds with other species, a history that stretched back thousands of years to the earliest days of their civilization. She said that this was something unique about her kind, something that set them apart from most other intelligent species in the galaxy. Most species viewed animals as tools to be used or threats to be eliminated. Humans saw them as potential companions, as partners who could share their lives and their work. Shave talked about wolves, the fierce pack hunters that had roamed Earth in the ancient times. She explained how humans had befriended them thousands of years ago, offering them food and shelter and a place in the human pack the wolves had accepted. And over generations, they had transformed into dogs, the most loyal companions humanity had ever known. She talked about horses, the powerful animals that had allowed humans to cross continents and build empires. She explained how humans had formed partnerships with them, working together rather than forcing submission. She talked about falcons and elephants and even cats, which had essentially domesticated themselves. By choosing to live alongside humans, she said that the key to all these relationships was mutual benefit, and trust. Humans did not break animals into submission. Through pain and fear, they offered food and shelter and companionship, and in return, the animals offered their loyalty and their skills. The relationship was a partnership. Not a slavery. Vorik pushed forward through the crowd and interrupted her. Mid-sentence's voice was loud and angry. Cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, he said that this was absurd. That what she had done was nothing more than a parlor trick. He said that the creature might play fetch, but that did not make it a useful weapon. He said that a war beast needed to obey commands instantly and without question, to attack enemies on command and return to its handler when called. He said that retrieving a stick proved nothing about the creature's ability to function in actual combat. Tuna nodded and said that Vorik raised a valid point. She said that she had not yet trained Bahram for combat situations, that doing so would require more time and more work. But she also said that she believed a willing partner would always be more effective than a broken slave. She said that Bahram was intelligent enough to make decisions on its own, to assess situations and react appropriately. If it trusted her, then it would fight alongside her willingly, bringing all of its intelligence and power to bear in her defense. Vorik laughed harshly, and the sound echoed through the observation deck. He said that trust was a fantasy, a delusion that humans told themselves to feel better about their weakness. He said that animals did not feel trust, that they only understood fear and hunger. He said that everything else was human projection. Seeing emotions where none existed, Duna looked at the legendary handler and felt a surge of anger that she forced herself to control. Said that she respectfully disagreed with his assessment. She said that she had seen the intelligence in Bahram's eyes, had felt the creature respond to kindness in ways that had nothing to do with food. She said that the Kalani method might work on simpler creatures, animals that operated on pure instinct, but it would never work on beings that were smart enough to feel resentment, smart enough to hate their captors. Vorik's face twisted with rage, and for a moment she thought he might try to attack her. Right there on the observation deck, he said that she was an arrogant child who knew nothing about the real world. He said that he had been handling war beasts for longer than she had been alive. He said that he did not need lectures from a human about his life's work. Commander Galwin stepped between them before the immediate confrontation could escalate further. He raised his hands for calm and said that this debate was not productive. He said that what mattered was results, not theories or philosophies. He looked down at Yuna and said that he was impressed with what she had accomplished, that she had done something remarkable. But Vorik had a point about combat effectiveness. The coalition needed warriors, not pets. If Bahram could not be used for military purposes, then the creature served no purpose, and the termination order would stand. Nuna felt her heart sink, but she refused to give up. She asked the commander for more time, explaining that she could train Bahram for combat if she was given the chance, said that the bond they had formed was the foundation, and that everything else could be built on top of it. The commander considered this for a long moment, his 4 eyes studying her face. He said that he would give her 1 more week. He said that at the end of that week, she would need to demonstrate that Bahram could respond to commands in a simulated combat situation. If she succeeded, then the creature would live, and her methods would be recognized. If she failed, then Vorik would get what he wanted. Duna thanked the commander and promised that she would not disappoint him. She looked down at Bahram, who was sitting beside her and watching the aliens above with calm amber eyes. The creature did not understand what was being discussed, but it trusted Hirsch, put her hand on its massive head, and silently promised that she would not let it down. She had 1 week to turn a fetch-playing beast into a warrior, 1 week to prove that kindness was stronger than cruelty. The stakes could not be higher, and she was going to need every minute of every day to succeed. But looking at Bahram, at the trust and affection in those amber eyes, she knew that giving up was not an option. They would do this together, or they would fail together. Either way, she would never abandon her friend, though. Week that followed was the most intense and exhausting period of Yuna's entire life. She spent every waking moment with Bahram, pushing herself to the limits of her endurance. As she worked to prepare the creature for the combat demonstration, she barely slept, catching only a few hours here and there when her body absolutely refused to continue. She ate her meals in the containment facility, unwilling to leave Baram's side for any longer than absolutely necessary. Idaho brought her food and coffee, clean clothes, and he worried about her constantly. He told her that she was going to collapse if she kept pushing herself this hard. He told her that she needed to rest, that she would be no good to Baram if she worked herself into exhaustion, but Yuna knew that rest was a luxury she could not afford. She knew that the commander would not give her another extension, and she knew that Vorik was watching her every move, waiting for her to fail. The legendary handler had made no secret of his contempt for her methods. He had told everyone who would listen that the human scientist was wasting time and resources on a doomed project. He said that the creature might have learned some tricks, but that it would never be a true war beast, said that Yuna's softness would be the death of her when the Morocks inevitably turned on her, but Yuna did not let his words affect her, because she knew something that Vorik refused to accept. She knew that Baram was not just following commands. Baram was choosing to work with her, choosing to trust her, choosing to be her partner, and that choice made all the difference in the world. The training progressed faster than she had expected, faster than she had dared to hope. Baram was incredibly intelligent, more intelligent than any animal Yuna had ever worked with. Seemed to understand that she was trying to teach it something important, that there was a purpose behind the exercises and drills. The creature learned to respond to hand signals, complex gestures that communicated different commands without the need for words, learned to distinguish between different tones of voice that indicated different actions. A sharp command meant to attack, a soft word meant to wait, a high whistle meant to return. Yuna taught it to stay in place, even when it wanted to move, to hold its position until she gave the signal to advance. She taught it to act quickly when the situation demanded it, to respond instantly to her commands without hesitation. Helped her set up training scenarios using holographic targets and simulated threats. He programmed the station's systems to create realistic combat situations, enemies that attacked from multiple directions, and obstacles that had to be navigated. Baram learned to identify enemies by the way Yuna pointed at them, distinguishing between targets and non-targets with remarkable accuracies. Learned to attack on command and retreat on command, to strike with devastating force and then disengage before counterattacks could land it. Learned to protect Yuna when she gave the signal, positioning its massive body between her and any threat. The creature was not just learning to follow orders, it was learning to work as part of a team, to anticipate Yuna's needs and respond to her intentions even before she gave explicit comments. Yuna began to understand something during those long days and nights of training, something that Vorik had never grasped despite all his years of experience. Baram did not want to be controlled, but it did want to belong. The creature had been ripped from its home and brought to this strange place full of strange beings that hurt it and confused it. It had been alone and afraid for so long, surrounded by enemies who wanted to break it. Now it had found someone who treated it with kindness and respects, someone who asked rather than demanded, someone who rewarded rather than punished. Baram was loyal to Yuna because it chose to be, because she had earned its trust through compassion and patience, and that voluntary loyalty was worth more than any forced submission could ever be. On the fourth day of training, something happened that tested everything Yuna believed. She was in the enclosure with Baram, working on attack formations, when a maintenance drone malfunctioned. The drone had been operating in a nearby section of the station when its navigation system failed, flew erratically through an open door and into the containment area, buzzing loudly and flashing its lights in random patterns. Baram reacted instantly. The creature's entire body tensed, and its muscles coiled like springs ready to release. It let out a growl that vibrated through the floor, and its four amber eyes tracked the drone with predatory focus. It looked like it was about to attack, to destroy the intruder that had invaded its space. Yuna felt a moment of fear, a spike of terror that shot through her body and made her heart race. but she forced herself to stay calm. Forced herself to remember everything she had learned about Baram. She spoke to the creature in a soft, steady voice, telling it that the drone was not a threat. She stepped between Baram and the drone. Placing herself directly in the path of any potential attack, she held up her hand in the signal for stop. Meeting the creature's amber eyes with her own, Baram looked at her and looked at the drone. And she could see the conflict in its eyes. Its instincts were screaming at it to attack, to destroy the buzzing machine that was setting its nerves on edge, but it trusted her. It trusted her more than it trusted its own instincts, though. Creature stayed where it was, trembling with the effort of restraining itself, but it did not attack. Tejo managed to override the drone's controls from the monitoring station. Sending commands that brought the malfunctioning machine under control, the drone flew out of the enclosure, and Baram relaxed immediately. The creature turned to Yuna and nuzzled against her shoulder. Making that soft rumbling sound of contentment, she hugged it tightly and praised it for its self-control. Giving it extra protein strips as a reward, she told it that it had done wonderfully. That she was so proud of how strong it was when she left the enclosure that evening, exhausted but elated. She found Vorik waiting for her in the corridor. The legendary handler was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and his dark eyes watched her approach with an expression she could not read. He did not speak for a long moment. Simply staring at her in silence, finally he said that what he had witnessed today was impossible. Said that the creature should have destroyed the drone and probably Yuna as well, he said. That no amount of training could override the predatory instincts of an apex predator, that such instincts were hardwired into the creatures. Very Biengenus said that it was not about overriding instincts. She said that it was about giving Baram a reason to control those instincts. She said that the creature trusted her, and that it had chosen to listen to her even when its body was telling it to. Vorik shook his head slowly. And for the first time since she had met him, he did not look angry, he looked thoughtful. Almost troubled, he said that humans were strange creatures. Unlike any species he had ever encountered, he said that he had spent his entire life mastering the art of dominance and control. He had always believed that this was the only way to work with dangerous animals, the only path that produced reliable results. Yuna asked if he still believed that after what he had seen. Vorik did not answer for a long time. Then he said that he did not know anymore. He said that what she had done went against everything he had been taught, everything he had practiced for decades, but he could not deny the results. He could not deny that Baram had chosen to obey her. Even when every instinct screamed otherwise, he turned and walked away without another word. Disappearing around a corner, Yuna watched him go and felt a small flicker of hope kindling in her chest. Perhaps the legendary handler was not as close-minded as she had thought. Perhaps he was capable of learning. Just as Baram had learned, perhaps there was hope for all of them. The final days of training were intense and challenging. Pushing both Yuna and Baram to their limit, she designed increasingly complex scenarios to test the creature's abilities. Scenarios that mimicked real combat conditions. She had drones attack from multiple directions simultaneously, and Baram learned to prioritize threats and engage them in order of danger, would take out the most immediate threat first, then move to the next. Always aware of the tactical situation, she had holographic hostages placed in the training area. Innocent figures that needed to be protected. Baram learned to distinguish between enemies and non-combatants. To avoid harming civilian targets while neutralizing threats, she put herself in simulated danger. Standing in the line of fire and trusting Baram to protect her, the creature learned to anticipate threats before they materialized. Positioning itself to defend her without being told, the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Deepening into something that went beyond trainer and Animaluna, began to feel like she could sense what Baram was feeling. Like there was a connection between them that transcended words. She could tell when the creature was excited or bored, frustrated or content. She could read its moods through subtle changes in its posture, and the movement of its amber eyes. And Baram seemed to understand her just as well. The creature would often anticipate her commands before she gave them, responding to her intentions rather than waiting for explicit signals. It would move to protect her before she even realized there was a threat. Sensing danger through some instinct, she could not explain they were becoming partners in a way that went beyond anything Yuna had experienced before. They were becoming friends on the morning of the final demonstration. Yuna woke before dawn and lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She was nervous in a way she had not felt since her first day on the station. Her stomach tight with anxiety. Everything she had worked for came down to this day. If she failed, then Barum would be killed and her methods would be dismissed. The Kalani would continue to break animals through torture, and no one would ever know that there was another way if she succeeded. Then she would prove that humans had something valuable to offer the galaxy, something that went beyond technology and military strengths, something that was built on connection and compassion. She got up and dressed and made her way to Section 7. Walking through corridors that were just beginning to fill with the station's early risers, the observation deck was already packed when she arrived. More aliens than she had ever seen in one place. Commander Galwan was there at the front, along with a dozen high-ranking officers from Coalition military headquarters. Boric stood apart from the others with his arms crossed over his chest, his face unreadable. The quantum link was active, and she could see the faces of Coalition military leaders watching from across the galaxy. She entered the enclosure, and Barum came to greet her immediately. The creature seemed to sense her nervousness, because it pressed its massive head against her chest and rumbled softly. It was trying to comfort her. She realized it was trying to tell her that everything would be okay. Yuna hugged her friend and whispered that she trusted Barum completely. She said that they had trained for this, that they were ready. The creature looked at her with those 4 amber eyes, and she could see something that looked like determination. Barum was ready. Yuna stepped back and raised her hand. The demonstration began. The demonstration began with a series of basic commands, and Barum executed each one flawlessly, with a precision that drew murmurs of approval from the crowd. Bova Yuna signaled for the creature to stay, and it froze in place like a statue, every muscle locked in perfect stillness. She signaled for it to come, and it bounded toward her with eager energy. Stopping exactly at her feet, she signaled for it to lie down, and it dropped to the floor instantly, its massive body pressing flat against the ground. The crowd on the observation deck watched in silence as the fearsome predator responded to the small human with complete obedience. These were simple commands, nothing that would prove the creature's combat effectiveness, but they demonstrated something important. They demonstrated control. Then the combat scenarios began, and everything Changetto activated the first wave of training drones from the monitoring station. His fingers flying across the controls, 20 armed machines flew into the enclosure from multiple directions, their weapons powering up with an ominous whine. The drones were programmed to simulate enemy combatants, and their weapons fired stun bolts that would hurt but not kill. Yuna pointed at the first drone and gave the attack signal. A sharp gesture with her right hand, Barum moved like lightning. The creature leaped across the enclosure in a single bound. Crossing 10 meters in the blink of an eye, it struck the drone with one massive paw, and the machine exploded into fragments of metal and sparking circuits before the pieces had even hit the ground. Barum was already moving to the next target. It moved through the drones with devastating efficiency, each strike precise and lethal. The creature was a blur of obsidian scales and amber eyes, moving faster than anything that size had any right to move. Within seconds, half the drones were destroyed. Scattered across the floor in pitches, Yuna signaled for Barum to return. A sharp whistle that cut through the sound of exploding machinery. The creature immediately broke off its attack, abandoning a drone it had been about to destroy and bounding back to her side. The remaining drones continued to fire, their stun bolts crackling through the air. But Barum positioned itself between Yuna and the weapons. It was protecting her, shielding her with its own body. Yuna gave another attack signal, and Barum surged forward again. It destroyed the rest of the drones in moments, moving through them like a scythe through wheat. The enclosure fell silent, except for the sound of sparking machinery and falling debris. Returned to Yuna and sat down beside her, looking up at the observation deck as if waiting for applause. Crowd was stunned into absolute silence. Commander Galwan stepped forward, and his 4 eyes were wide with amazement that he did not try to hide. He said that he wanted to see the hostage scenario. The most complex test they had, prepared Taiho. Activated the next simulation. With trembling fingers, holographic figures appeared throughout the enclosure. Dozens of them, filling the space with light and color. Some were marked as enemies, their forms outlined in red and carrying simulated weapons. Others were marked as civilians, outlined in blue and cowering in fear. The enemies began moving toward Yuna with weapons raised, their holographic faces twisted in aggression. Barum growled deep in its chest, but it did not attack. It looked at Yuna and waited for her command. Trusting her to tell it what to do, Yuna pointed at the first enemy figure and gave the signal. Barum struck the hologram with one paw, passing through the light as the system registered a kill. The figure flickered and disappeared from the simulation. She pointed at the next enemy and the next, and Barum destroyed each one with precise, controlled strikes. It moved through the enemy holograms while carefully avoiding the civilian figures, navigating around them without making contact. One enemy tried to grab a civilian hologram as a shield, using the innocent figure as protection. Barum did not hesitate, circled around and struck from an angle that would not have harmed a real hostage, taking out the threat without endangering the civilian. The creature was not just following orders, it was thinking and adapting and making decisions based on the situation in front of it. When the last enemy hologram was destroyed, Barum returned to Yuna and rumbled contentedly. The crowd erupted in murmurs and exclamations, the sound of dozens of voices all talking at once. Steven Vorik looked impressed, though his scarred face showed that he was struggling with what he had witnessed. Commander Galwen held up his hands for silence, and the crowd slowly quieted. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some assessment of what they had all seen, but before he could say a word, the station alarms began to scream. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the facility, casting everything in crimson shadows. A harsh automated voice announced a code-red security breach. Repeating the warning over and over, the commander touched his communicator, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. As he listened to the report, his gray face went pale as the information poured into his. Here he turned to the crowd and said that hostile ships had been detected. Approaching the station, he said that a raider fleet had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and that they were already launching boarding parties. The BWS, coalition defense ships that normally protected the station, were hours away, responding to a distress call that had apparently been a diversion. The station was almost defenseless. Chaos erupted on the observation deck as officers began shouting orders and running to their stations. The quantum link flickered and died as the raiders jammed communications, cutting off contact with coalition headquarters. Commander Galwen shouted for everyone to evacuate to the emergency shelters to get to safety while security forces dealt with the threat, but another alarm cut him off before he could finish. The automated voice announced that the raiders had targeted the escape pods. That evacuation was not possible. The boarding parties had already disabled the evacuation systems. They were. Trapaduna stood in the enclosure with Barum and watched the panic unfolding above her. Her heart was racing, but her mind was strangely calm. She had spent weeks preparing for a combat demonstration, training Barum to respond to threats and protect her. Now she had an opportunity to show what they could really do, not in a simulation, but in actual combat. She looked at Barum, and the creature was alert and tense, its amber eyes scanning the room for threats. It could sense that something was wrong, that the fear filling the station was real. And immediately Yuna spoke to her friend in a calm voice. Cutting through the chaos around them, she told Barum that bad people were coming. People who wanted to hurt everyone on this station. She said that they were going to hurt innocent beings who had never done anything wrong. She asked Barum if it was ready to help her stop them. Creature looked at her and rumbled deep in its chest, and there was something fierce and eager in its eyes. It wanted to fight. It wanted to protect Yuna, smiled grimly and said that was what she thought. She called up to Taeho and asked if he could lower the containment barriers, the ones that would keep them trapped in Section 7. Taeho's voice came through the speakers, and he sounded absolutely terrified. He said that she could not be serious, that what she was suggesting was insane. He reminded her that letting a Morax loose on the station during a crisis could make everything where Suna said that the raiders were going to kill everyone if they did not do something. She said that the station's security forces were overwhelmed and outgunned. She said that Barum could help, that she trusted the creature with her life. Teho was silent for a long moment, and she could hear the sounds of battle beginning. Somewhere in the station, explosions and weapons fire and screaming, then the containment barriers flickered and disappeared. Yuna ran toward the exit, with Baram at her side, and the massive creature matched her pace perfectly. Burst out of Section 7 and into the main corridors of the station. The hallways were filled with chaos, with running aliens and screaming civilians and security personnel trying to maintain order. When people saw Baram emerge from the restricted section, they screamed even louder. Some tried to run, some tried to hide. Some simply froze in terror, but the creature ignored them completely. It stayed beside Yuna and watched the chaos with alert eyes, waiting for her to tell it what to do. Somewhere deeper in the station, they could hear the sound of weapons fire, the distinctive crackle of energy, weapons, and the boom of explosives. The raiders had breached the hull and were moving through the station. Yuna moved toward the sound and Baram followed. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of raiders. The attackers were hulking brutes covered in mismatched armor, their bodies modified with cybernetic enhancements. They carried brutal weapons designed to cause maximum pain and destruction. They saw Yuna first, a small human woman standing alone in the corridor. They raised their weapons with ugly grins, seeing easy prey. Then they saw Baram. The grins disappeared instantly, replaced by expressions of shock and terror. The lead raider shouted something in a language Yuna did not understand, his voice rising in panic. He raised his weapon and tried to fire. Yuna pointed at him and gave the attack signal. Barum moved. The creature was across the corridor in a heartbeat. A blur of obsidian scales and burning amber eyes. Its claws tore through the raider's armor like it was made of paper, and the attacker fell without making a sound. The other raiders tried to react, tried to bring their weapons to bear, but they were too slow. Barum was among them like a whirlwind of death. It struck and dodged and struck again, each blow precise and devastating. The creature moved through the raider squad like they were standing still, its speed and power beyond anything they could match. In seconds, the entire squad was down, scattered across the corridor in pieces. Barum returned to Yuna and nudged her with its massive head, checking that she was unharmed. There was blood on its claws, but none on its scales. The creature had not been to Shaduna. Put her hand on Barum's head and said that it had done well. Then she heard more weapons fire from ahead, more screaming and more explosions. The raiders had spread throughout the station, and there were civilians in danger, innocent people who would die if no one helped them. Yuna ran forward and Barum ran with her. They were partners. Now they would face this fight together. No matter what awaited them in the corridors ahead, the battle raged through the corridors of Station Harmony 7. And Yuna lost track of how many raider squads they had encountered. There had been 5, or maybe 6, or maybe more. They had all ended the same way, with Barum tearing through them like a force of nature. While Yuna directed its attacks, the creature was relentless and tireless, showing no signs of fatigue. Despite the intensity of the fighting, it seemed to anticipate threats before Yuna even saw them, sensing danger through some instinct she could not explain. Twice the massive beast knocked her to the ground, just before a plasma bolt flew through the space where her head had been. It was protecting her even as it fought, always aware of her position and always ready to shield her from harm. They cleared corridor after corridor, freeing civilian groups that had been cornered by raiders. Aliens of every species looked at them with a mixture of terror and gratitude, unable to process the sight of a human woman leading a Morox through the station like a pet word began to spread through the station's internal networks. Through whispered messages and shouted warnings, something was hunting the attackers, something massive and terrifying and completely unstoppable. The raiders had come expecting easy prey, a poorly defended station full of civilians and scientists. Instead, they found a nightmare given. Flashuna and Baram made their way toward the central hub. Following the sounds of the heaviest fighting, this was where the station's command center was located, where the senior officers had retreated to coordinate the defense. She knew that if the raiders captured the hub, they would have control of all the station's systems. They could vent atmosphere from entire sections, could disable life support, could kill everyone aboard without firing another shot. The central hub was a massive circular chamber at the heart of the station, with corridors branching off in every direction. When Yuna arrived, she saw that the situation was desperate. Station security had formed a defensive line behind hastily constructed barricades. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. The raider commander had brought an elite squad with heavy weapons. Soldiers who were bigger and better armed than the ones Yuna had faced before. The defenders were being pushed back, meter by meter, their barricades crumbling under sustained fire. Commander Galwen was crouched behind one of the barricades with a weapon in each of his 4 hands. His gray skin was stained with blood, some of it his own, and he looked exhausted beyond measure. But he was still fighting, still refusing to surrender. Even as his forces fell around him, the raiders saw Barum emerge from the corridor behind the security line. And for a moment, everyone stopped fighting. The defenders stared in shock. Unable to believe what they were seeing, the attackers stared in terror, their weapons suddenly seeming very small and inadequate. The elite soldiers looked at the massive creature with its obsidian scales and burning amber eyes and its claws still dripping with the blood of their comrades. Several of them took involuntary steps backward, their training overwhelmed by primal fear. The raider commander was the first to recover. He was a massive alien with scarred blue skin and cybernetic implants covering half his face. His body had been modified extensively, enhanced with artificial muscles and reinforced bones that made him nearly as large as Barum. He shouted orders in a harsh voice, rallying his soldiers and forcing them back into formation. He raised a weapon that hummed with deadly energy, a heavy cannon designed to take down armored vehicles. He aimed it directly at Barum and prepared to fire. Runa shouted a warning, but Barum had already seen the threat. The creature lunged to the side as the weapon discharged, and the beam missed by centimeters. The shot carved a molten furrow in the floor where Barum had been standing, superheated metal splashing against the walls. Before the commander could fire again, Barum was moving. The creature charged across the hub with incredible speed, dodging fire from the other raiders as it closed the distance. The elite soldiers tried to stop it, tried to bring it down with concentrated fire. But Barum was too fast and too strong. It plowed through them like they were not even there, scattering bodies in its wake. The commander fired again, and this time the beam grazed Barum's shoulder. The creature roared in pain as the superheated energy burned through its scales. But it did not slow down. It hit the commander with the full force of its charge. For tons of muscle and rage focused on a single target, the raider leader tried to fight back, tried to use his enhanced strength to hold off the beast for a moment. They struggled against each other, the commander's cybernetics whining as they pushed to their limits. But Barum was not just strong. Barum was angry. One swipe of those massive claws, and the battle was over. The commander fell, and his remaining soldiers broke and ran. The hub fell silent, except for the sound of Barum's heavy breathing and the groans of wounded raiders. The creature stood over the body of the raider commander, and it let out a roar that shook the walls. It was a sound of triumph, of victory, of defiance against all those who had tried to break it. Then it turned and walked back to Yuna, its amber eyes softening as it approached. It sat down beside her and pressed its massive head against her shoulder, seeking comfort after the fury of Battagliona. Wrapped her arms around her friend and held on tight. Tears were streaming down her face, and her whole body was shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. But they had won. The station was saved. Commander Galwen emerged from behind his barricade and walked toward them slowly. His weapons still in his hands, he stopped a few meters away and looked at Yuna, and then looked at Barum's gray face. Showed emotions that Yuna had never seen from him before. Wonder and gratitude, and something that might have been shame. He said that he did not know what to say. He said that she had saved the entire station, that without her and her creature, they would all be dead. He said that he had been wrong about everything. Wrong about her methods, and wrong about the Morax, and wrong about what was. Possiblina wiped her eyes and said that she had just done what needed to be done. She said that Barum had done most of the fighting. that she had just pointed and let the creature do what it was born to, Dutha Commander looked at Bahram. And there was no fear in his eyes anymore. There was only respect. The kind of respect that one warrior shows to another. He said that the coalition military leaders had seen everything through the security recordings before the raiders jammed. Communications, he said, that they had been watching when she released Bahram. And they had watched every battle that followed, he said that. There was talk of creating a new program to study human bonding techniques for application across all species in the coalition. He asked if she would be willing to lead such a program. Yuna looked at Bahram, and the creature rumbled contentedly and nuzzled against Hirsch. She said that she would be honored, that she could think of nothing she would rather do. The commander nodded and turned to walk away, to begin organizing the cleanup and the care of the wounded, but he stopped when he saw Vorik standing in one of the doorways. Legendary handler had bandages on his arms and soot on his face, and it was clear that he had been fighting raiders as well. He walked forward slowly, his dark eyes fixed on Yuna and Bahram. When he reached them, he stopped and stood in silence for a long moment. Then Vorik did something that Yuna had not expected. He bowed, was a deep bow, the kind that Kalani gave to those they recognized as masters of their craft. He held the bow for several seconds before straightening, and when he looked at her again, his expression had changed. He said that he had been a fool. He said that he had spent his entire life believing that dominance was the only path to control. He said that she had shown him another way, a better way, and that he was grateful for the lesson. He asked if she would allow him to observe her methods, to learn from her as a student learns from a teacher. He said that he wanted to understand how she had done what she did, wanted to know how she had formed a bond with a creature that he had declared untambled. Luna smiled and said that she would be happy to teach him. She said that the first lesson was simple kindness was not weakness, trust was stronger. Then fear and partnership would always triumph over. Slaver Bahram rumbled in agreement, as if it understood the words she was speaking. In the days that followed, the station was repaired and the dead were mourned. The raiders who had survived were taken into custody, and the coalition sent ships to ensure that no more attacks would occur. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least to a new version of normal. Oyana was given a new title and a new office, one much larger than the cramped closet she had worked in before. She was given a team of researchers from a dozen different species, all of them eager to understand the human approach to interspecies bonding. She was given resources and funding and support, everything she needed to develop her methods and share them with the Galactic HFY. Was promoted to chief engineer of the station as a reward for his bravery during the attack. He complained constantly that it meant more work and more responsibility, but Yuna could tell he was proud he had helped save the station, and everyone knew it. Vorik became an unlikely ally. Attending every training session and taking meticulous notes, his pride had been shattered by what Yuna had accomplished. But his curiosity had been awakened. He asked questions constantly, always wanting to understand why she did things the way she did. He would never use the Kalani methods again. He told her one day he had seen a better way, and he could not go back to the old ways after that. Story of what had happened on Station Harmony 7 spread across the galaxy through news reports and official communications. People began to see humans in a new light, to understand that they had something precious to offer. They were not just a young species with primitive customs and strange ways. They had a gift, a unique ability to form bonds with other creatures that no other species could match. They had the gift of connection. Yuna often thought about how much her life had changed since she first saw Bahram in that transport cage all those weeks ago. She had come to this station feeling invisible and unimportant, ignored by everyone except her one friend. Now she was leading a program that might change the way the entire galaxy thought about the relationship between species. But the thing she treasured most was not the title or the recognition or the resources. It was the bond she shared with her friend one evening. As the stars burned cold and distant outside the station windows, she sat in the newly converted habitat. Batha Bay had been transformed into a living space for Bahram, with grass-covered floors and artificial trees and a small pond where the creature liked to drink. Yuna sat on bench and watched Bahram chase a drone stick across the grass. the most feared predator in 3-star systems, bounded after the stick with joy in every movement. Its massive body moving with playful energy, it caught the stick in its jaws and ran back to her, dropping it at her feet and looking up with expectant amber eyes. The analog was wagging back and forth like a happy doguna, laughed and threw the stick again. And Bahram raced after it. They played like this for hours, the human woman and the alien beast. Until the artificial lights dimmed to simulate nightfall. Commander Galwan watched from the observation window above, and he was recording a message to send to Coalition High Command. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. He said that he was submitting his final report on the human xenobiologist and her unconventional methods. He said that what she had accomplished defied everything the Kalani had believed about animal training for centuries. He said that she had taken a creature that their greatest handler had declared untamable, a creature that had nearly killed that handler, and turned it into a loyal companion. He said that she had done this not through force or fear, but through patience and kindness and an approach that only humans seemed to understand. He said that the coalition would be wise to pay attention to human methods and to invest in studying them. Further, he said that there was much they could learn from this young species. He paused the recording and watched Una playing with Bahram in the habitat. Below, the massive predator was rolling on its back while the small human scratched its belly, making that rumbling sound of contentment. It was hard to believe this was the same creature that had torn through a raider army just days before. The commander smiled slightly, something he rarely did. He resumed the recording and added one final note. He said that, in the future, coalition forces should remember one important thing when dealing with dangerous creatures: never underestimate a human with a stick and patience. Ended the recording and stood watching for a few more minutes. Reluctant to leave the peaceful scene, then he turned and walked away, leaving Una and Bahram to their game. The stars burned cold and distant outside the station windows, as they always did, but inside the habitat bay there was warmth and joy in the beginning of something that would change the galaxy forever. A friendship between two very different beings built on trust and kindness, and the simple truth that connection was more powerful than control, and a game of fetch that had proven the impossible was possible after all.